says, you gotta listen to the intent, not the words. To me, this whole thing with people deciding how practitioners should talk screams a room full of people who have no idea how living with this actually is. They're just making rules to save their own butts instead of making actual sense. So basically, hospitals don't want to get sued. Danny Mosley says, I've been called much worse things in my 57 years. Another point being made is that people just don't want to be called diabetes themselves, so like, don't call me diabetes. So Carlin Dallas said, personally, I don't mind being called a diabetic, but my big brother sometimes makes me mad because he'll randomly call me and be like, yo, diabetes. But I guess he thinks he can because I respond like it's nothing. So basically, like, don't call me diabetes. That's very obvious. That's obviously offensive. Unless you're close friends and it's a joke, but play it by ear. For another person, it depends on the language it's in, so I'm just going to paraphrase YPOC's comment, and he basically said in English, doesn't care either way, but in German, he prefers saying, Ich habe diabetes, I have diabetes, compared to Diabetiker, I don't know how you say that. So it depends on the language for him. So that was kind of interesting to me. Get Revved said, if anyone gets offended by the word diabetic, they seriously need bigger things to worry about. If someone is an athlete, they're athletic. If someone has diabetes, they're diabetic. It's how the English language works. And that comment got 12 likes. 2 people said that they thought that being called a person with diabetes was actually really patronizing. So Colette Brisboy says, it would almost seem patronizing to be called a person with diabetes, as it seems to imply that I should be offended by being called a diabetic. I'm not proud of my diabetes because honestly I wish I didn't have it, but I'm also not embarrassed or ashamed of it, and I have no reason to be. It's an autoimmune disease that I didn't do anything to cause. Beth Stewart says, I prefer being called diabetic because person with diabetes sounds really patronizing. I don't know. So that was an interesting comment. I never thought about it being patronizing before. From a parent's perspective, my daughter, my world said, my princess is type 1 and we have a really good friend who's also type 1. And my mother-in-law called last night while she was on the phone. Quickly, my daughter said, my friend is here, the diabetic one. And it broke my heart. I wanted to say, don't label her as that. I think saying my friend who has diabetes too is here sounds gentler. Another good point. Danielle Otto says, I think using person-first language helps people to think about me in more positive light because it shifts the focus away from what I can't do to what I can. I'm so much more than what I lack, but there's a danger in calling somebody disabled or implying that they can't do anything. So strive for person first, I say, but if you speak with kindness and respect at all times, I'm not going to be hurt. So again, the intent of the language. For Vestigial Scott, diabetic reminds him less of the fact that he has a weakness and illness and makes it a part of who he is compared to a person with diabetes. So I found it really interesting that a lot of comments were saying like both things, like diabetic felt like a label to them or person with diabetes felt like a label to them. Like some people said person with diabetes was more focused on diabetes, some people said it was less. So it was really very, very subjective. Mike P makes a good point. He says we need to stop politically correcting everything. We can keep changing everything, but with people today, it will offend someone else for some reason. So the cycle will just keep getting worse unless we stop this vicious cycle soon. So basically, like what I just said, like if you call it one thing, it might offend somebody. If you call it another thing, it might offend somebody. Everyone is so different, and it's like, even if you change the word, somebody else is probably gonna get offended. Another point I saw brought up a lot is that it really depends on the context, which one you're going to use. So Duct Tape 303 said, personally it doesn't matter to me. Diabetic seems more casual and person with diabetes seems more professional. I imagine hearing person with diabetes at a hospital or a doctor's office and not an everyday conversation. Arizona Alicia said, I don't believe it should offend anyone, but totally understand why in the medical field they would want you to be mindful of others' feelings, especially if they don't already feel well to begin with. So again, they see it being used in the medical world, which is where I've heard that you should use person with diabetes in nursing school. That's where they taught me that. For Shaylala, she says that her mom prefers person with diabetes, whereas she prefers diabetic, and they're both diabetic. They both have diabetes. So she says that for her mom, she thinks it's less about how other people see her and more about how she sees herself. She doesn't want diabetes to control her life. Whereas for herself, she feels like her diabetes has really shaped who she is. It's a part of her identity. Using diabetic doesn't make her feel like the disease has more control over her. Although she does try to stay clear of the word disease, it's kind of like a slap in the face sometimes. She said, everyone is multifaceted. Which word you use doesn't change that. I do, however, always try to remain respectful to Mom and refer to her as a person with diabetes, not because it changes how others see her, but because it changes the way she sees herself. I thought that was powerful. And as far as context goes, she continued to say, I feel like the younger generation has less of a problem with the word diabetes because it has less stigma than it used to. But you still have to deal with stigma today. But when my mom was a child, no one would sit next to her in class because they're worried they would catch it. She said, context is everything. And finally, the last comment I'm going to read is from Pamela Clark. And she said, I would rather people spend time thinking about how to cure it than what to call it. Bravo. So that is all the comments that I'm going to read today. Thank you so much to every single person who commented because it was really thought-provoking and you made a lot of really awesome, unique points that I hadn't even thought of before. So that was really cool for me, and it was just so interesting how what one word means to one person is completely different than what it can mean to another. So if you have any more thoughts about this, you can feel free to comment below. This is the last video I'm going to make. I'm not going to like put more comments up or anything, but I hope that you liked it. And if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you very soon for an all new video. Just remember, everybody's different, and if you think someone might be offended, just ask. Just ask what they prefer, and then you'll be safe because it's going to be different for everyone. So, bye! Person with diabetes, Danica. I like diabetic Danica.